boy didn't know the answer, and there was a few people around him starting to realise that the teacher didn't know everything after all, and the teacher started feeling a bit threatened and took a step back and then said, I think I'd prefer you if you got on with the 6 questions that are on the board, because we want to answer all these things at the end of the lesson. So the teacher, everything sort of calmed down and everything got a bit quiet again, and the teacher sort of, you could see him metaphorically mopping his brow as he sort of got through that one. And then a young girl put her hand up and said, "Excuse me, sir, can I ask a question?" And the teacher said, "Oh, yes, I'm always open for student questions." And the girl said, "Look, I come from Samoa, and in Samoa, it's a tropical environment like this one. But there, we wear clothing from our neck down to the ground, particularly the women." And she said, and she said that was a result of the Christianisation, the missionary movement, etc., that came to. She said, "Wouldn't it be interesting to have a look at the impact of missionaries on these people? To see if there'd been missionaries in this room, and how come these people are not wearing much clothing at all? How come there was a difference between our communities and their communities? I wonder how we could find that out." And the teachers was, what? How can we? Oh, goodness me! And he said, "Look, at the end of it, he sort of said, get on with your work, will you?" And those are very serious questions on the board that we've got to answer them. This is based on Bloom's taxonomy, and we've got to try. And he explained to me later on. He said, "I was trying to get the students to move from low-level thinking skills to high-level thinking skills through the use of this taxonomy as he'd been trained to do." Well, of course, the students didn't muck around with describe the environment of the physical rainforest. I mean, holy heck, they could do that in a nanosecond. They went straight to the higher-level thinking questions. Anyway, at the end of the lesson, I was fortunate enough. I loved it. I thought it was great fun. And at the end of the lesson, I gave him a wee bit of feedback and a little bit of feed forward. I said, "Why don't you try another approach?" If you have, and luck would have it, he had another social studies class that very afternoon. I said, "Why don't you try a different approach? Show them the movie, wipe the questions off the whiteboard, and say to the students, 'Have you got any questions?'" He said, "Oh, okay, I'll try that." And he said, "It's pretty open, isn't it?" I said, "Well, yes, it's open, but give it a go. You've got a good relationship with the kids. It's not a control matter you're worried about. And just see what happens. Let's just see what happens." Well, he did that. He tried that the afternoon. Kids came in, they sat down, and he said, "Now I'm going to show you an 8-minute movie, and I'm not going to ask you anything. I'm just going to ask you, do you have any questions? I've got one question. Do you have any questions?" He had a clean whiteboard. Well, he showed the movie, and then he couldn't even get the movie finished before they started putting their hand up and saying, "I've got a question, I've got a question." They got 50 questions on the whiteboard that the kids just he couldn't keep up with them. He had to get someone else to clean another whiteboard off and get another pen out and get writing on the board. He couldn't keep up with all the questions. And the questions didn't muck around with low-level thinking skills. They were all high-level thinking skills. They were all incredibly complex, deep thinking skill type questions. Can you think of a technique, such a simple technique, that would open up a classroom such as that? From being a closed, the guy thought he was doing a great job. And on the surface of it, in our traditional ways of understanding a social studies class, he was doing a great job. And according to what I've said so far today, he was doing a great job in the sense that his relationships were sweet, and he was doing a good job as a teacher. But in terms of the 7 dimensions of monitoring, he wasn't doing a good job. The children, the learners, were not being engaged. They weren't taking ownership of their learning. They weren't being able to state how they preferred to learn. They weren't able to raise their own questions. They weren't able to work with others. Because after that, he then used those questions as a basis for the development of the curriculum. He was able then for the students to go ahead and find the answers to all those questions. And when you think of the availability of technology now, I mean, that was in the time when he had to use print material. Now you've got electronic material that students are able to get into and able to do this in groups. On which subject we were then able to say to him, look, instead of just using groups, and there are big problems with using groups pedagogically, and that is you often just get one or two people doing all the work and a couple of other people just cruising along. If you really want to get people engaged, don't use group work, use cooperative learning. It looks like group work, but everybody in a cooperative learning group gets a task. They get a role to play. And that makes a big difference in the quality of the work and the quality of the engagement in the learning. So, the story of the poison dart gives us some indications that there are forms of pedagogy that are far more sophisticated and are far more open to allow Indigenous ways of knowing. Because, you know, those questions were generated from the children's prior knowledge. They were generated from what the children already knew, which was part of what they already knew was determined and developed from who they were and their upbringing. They were able to ask questions that made sense to them. They were able to make sense of the world in a way that made sense to from their own cultural ways of knowing. In that way, what he was being introduced to was a culturally responsive pedagogy. And it was based upon relationships. But it was a culturally responsive pedagogy that enabled the young people to raise questions themselves. And so the teacher, from being the developer of all the questions, becomes the facilitator, the leader of the learning, and not the dominator of the learning. How can you do this with large numbers? Well, I've done it with 90 secondary school principals. And if you can handle 90 secondary school principals, I think you need a Nobel Peace Prize myself. 90 secondary school principals, I did a very similar activity using a cooperative learning approach, gave them all a role and some resource material, and then asked them, what questions have you got about this? And they hoed into it and had a great time. And they said, boy, I wish we'd did this in our schools. I said, well, you're the principal, maybe you could. You know, don't ask me to do it, maybe you could do it. Maybe you could suggest this is a way of going. Anyway, I hope that addresses, I thought that that was a really good question, the business about Indigenous people. I just want to finish with this final thought. If you want to know who are the experts in Indigenous knowledge, it's probably Indigenous people. And you don't have to be 71 to be an Indigenous person with knowledge. You actually can be an Indigenous person with knowledge from the day you're born. And the biggest expert on how to be a young Indigenous person is probably a young Indigenous person. So one of the best ways of doing these things is to actually allow those people to talk. And takes me right back to the students that you've invited along today. And they told us those 7 points. They were telling us about, they were monitoring the learning that was going on, that they were taking part in. So, well done. Nō reira, koutou mā, tēnā koutou o, koutou manaakitanga kia hau. And I just said to you in New Zealand Māori, thank you very much for your hospitality. And when I opened up this morning, thank you for acknowledging that. It's a very important thing to do in New Zealand Māori, is to acknowledge where you are and who the people of the land are. And the land is really important, and it's to acknowledge who you are and to say thank you very much for your hospitality, and how honoured I was to be able to stand on your land and say all this stuff and for you to listen. And so I do it as a visitor, I do it as a manuhiri, and I do it as a person who's giving out an idea as a koha, which is a gift. Is a gift. Whenever we go anywhere, we have to give a gift to say thank you for having us. And so I'm giving you this gift of these ideas. and the rangatiratanga, the determination of you to pick it up is yours. No reira, manakitanga means hospitality in all its biggest senses. So thank you very much for your hospitality to my wife and myself for looking after us and feeding us and listening to myself. No reira, koutou mā, tēnā koutou, kia ora tātou.
Rather fortuitously, you mentioned the gifts, and we do have a gift for you. So I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Professor Bishop for not only his keynote, which was inspiring enough, but for his very in-depth and critical analysis of the commentary that went on through our panel and the presentations from our Teaching Excellence Award winners, and also from our students. As you mentioned, it's lovely to hear the student voice and see it from their very important perspective, because we are here for the students here, trying to help facilitate their learning. So this is just a small token, a small koha from us to you, and thanks for your taking the time to come here and share your wisdom and facilitate our understanding and co-construct our knowledge in relation to how we may teach better in this very complex environment. So, folks, that brings us towards the end of the program. So it's just opportunity for me. Oh, I've done what you did, Russell. The screen. Oh, there we go. To wrap up by thanking those who made today such a success. I'd like to thank our colleagues from I.T.S. and from E&I, and our faculty and Teaching Excellence Award winners, and of course Professor Bishop for sharing his wisdom with us today. I'd like to thank the sign language interpreters and our student helpers. There's a lot of logistics associated with an event like this, and so it's been wonderful to have their support for that as well. I'd like to thank the staff from my office, our Veloci, our driver, and my wonderful assistant Yvonne and Nia for her tireless work. It's been particularly difficult for Yvonne this year because she normally is ably supported by Karen, who is my executive officer, but as many of you know, she's left, and so Yvonne shouldered the burden, and she made an absolutely wonderful job of ensuring everything happened and everyone knew where to go and what needed to do, and getting the PowerPoints and all that done as well. So that's fantastic. Really appreciate that as well. Just a final comment on some of the things that Professor Bishop said there at the end. I think the thing that struck me about that was how scary it is for any teacher, but I think particularly for those of us in academia and in higher education, where we really are sort of seen by many as having the pinnacle of knowledge, having this very deep knowledge. And so to put yourself in a position where a lack of knowledge or lack of or challenging your knowledge is a very scary business. But as I think we've very much seen today how important that is, if we really want to engage our learners, really want them to think for themselves, challenge ideas, that's where the innovation, the creativity and the entrepreneurship and those things which everyone says are so important, that is going to come from, not from sort of getting students to restate facts that we've delivered to them in a very didactic manner. I think the challenge that Professor Bishop left us with today is to move forward in that space, move forward to a genuinely learner-centred education. And I think we've seen today already evidence that we have done that in pockets, and our challenge then is to scale that up, is to get that so that it is embedded in our thinking and the way we do our core business of education for peoples of the Pacific. And I think he gave us the clues of how to do that. And that is how that we need to collaborate. We need to collaborate with our colleagues and support each other, and we need to collaborate with our students, and we need students to collaborate with us so that we do move forward in a way that's mutually beneficial to the university and to the people right across the Pacific region. So thanks again to the audience. Thank you so much for coming today. I know everyone has lots of other commitments, and people think a break between semesters is a holiday. It's not. There's a lot of other stuff going on. We're well aware of that, so we do appreciate you taking the time out to share with us and to listen to what we had to say today. And we now have the true Pacific end to any event, which is a a very enjoyable meal. So I'd like you all to join us in having a meal together. Thank you.
It is on camera, yes.